And let's take a moment to just discuss how the phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. We had mentioned earlier that there's 44. And being that, okay, well, our alphabet has 26 letters. So there's obviously this overlap where we're going to have to use letters more than once. And you mentioned it with the C and the S, right? And there's instances where we have to use a couple letters or even up to 4 letters to represent one sound.
Right, so think of the word sleigh, the EIGH represents the long A sound. So as we talked about before, we have a really wonderful, robust, and rich language. It's morphophonemic, which means we spell by sound and by meaning. And we've adopted lots of words into our language from other languages. So the history of those words often explains why they're spelled that way, which is the kids love to know that. It's like this little mystery when you see a word. It's like being a detective. So for example, the word chlorophyll, you would expect perhaps to see an F, but it's a PH because the word has a Greek origin. So our English language actually makes a great deal of sense. But we have to understand the layers of language, our phonology, our orthography, our morphology, semantics and syntax, all that richness of our language really helps kids uncover and make sense of our language.
Definitely. And so the phonemic awareness is the ability to be aware of those different sounds and to blend and segment those sounds. And I know you have a couple examples that we can do after we finish going through these. Now, there is one thing that I think is really important to talk about, and it's something that I don't often hear or see in text, and that is the phonological working memory. Now, working memory itself is that mental whiteboard or scratch pad in your brain, and there's only a finite amount of information that you can hold there. And what's really important for educators to understand, especially with the struggling reader, if they don't have automaticity for the letter sound or the grapheme phoneme correspondence, then it's going to take them time and it's going to use up that store. So when they're sounding out the word, they may forget what the first sound was, and it's going to impact their comprehension of reading a sentence because, again, they don't have the ability to hold all the other information because they're putting too much focus and time into sounding out the word.
So it's very important when that happens, of course. One way we can start to support kids in holding on to those skills is, again, back to that explicit and systematic way of teaching students. So for example, if I am going to start teaching students how to blend sounds together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with sounds that are continuous. And by that, I mean sounds that I could hold on to the sounds till I could probably pass out, until, for example, when maybe where you are, make the sound for the P, for the grapheme P. So I'll make it, you make it too, okay? Okay, so that's a stop sound, right? That means because I'm making a quick burst of air and the sound stops. So stop sounds are around for a very brief time. Now listen to me make another sound for the grapheme S. Ready? So of course that sounds around a lot longer. So the students are able to keep it in their phonological memory. So if I was teaching students how to blend with a CV, a consonant vowel or vowel consonant, I would start with continuous sounds. So for example, a word like so or sun, and then ask them to blend that together and they'd say sun. Oftentimes when I visit classrooms, teachers will say, well, my students can't blend a CVC. And I'll say, well, tell me about some of the sounds that you're asking them to blend together. And they might say like cat or dog. So cat or dog, dog. So of course the vowels there I could hold on to longer because vowels are open sounds and continue. But the k and the t and the d and the g, they're all stop sounds. So if we know about this really important scope and sequence, if we understand about going from least complex to most complex, it helps students build this knowledge over time in a way that makes sense. So I would start with a sun or before I'd ever go to something like a cat or a dog for a CVC, because I would want them to have the opportunity to hear those sounds. It's called connected phonation. That's a big teacher word for it. But to begin with these continuous sounds, and I think it goes back to what Kathryn was saying. These were things, of course, that I didn't learn in college. I didn't learn as a reading specialist. I was a national board certified teacher. That wasn't part of my process either. So knowing these things, when I did learn them, make me a better teacher because I can use this knowledge. But, we always say, as she said, it's a no shame zone. A year from now, if Kathryn would invite me back, I would likely know something that I don't know now that I wish I would have been able to tell you tonight. So as teachers, we always have the responsibility of learning, right? And so when we the saying is, when we know better, we do better. But that's one thing when we think about phonics, that we can, we begin with speech, right? And so by knowing about the speech sounds of the language, it helps me be a better teacher and knowing how to plan my instruction.
Yes, of course. And I think it's important to highlight that you were talking about, the S and the U and the N being continuous sounds. Well, as we mentioned earlier, if you're teaching students their phonics from A to Z, well, those are near the end of the alphabet. So the easier sounds for them to work and manipulate with when they're just at the beginning are near the end of the alphabet. So how many weeks in, or how many letters into the alphabet would you have to be before you could start using these as examples to start working with them?
Mm-hmm. Well, as soon as my students know, as soon as they would know, for example, how to blend and segment sun, I would be mapping that to print right away, right? Because, there are means to an end. Phonemic awareness is essential, but of course it's a means to an end. So if I can blend sun, if I as a teacher said sun, and I said blend it together and they said sun, or if I said sun and they said sun, right? Immediately I would be like getting out my little paddle. We might be moving the sounds down, but right away then we would say sound was, and then, what grapheme or letter represents that sound, it would be S, right? What sound? What grapheme represents that sound? U, right? What sound? N. What grapheme represents that sound? That's N. What's our word? Sun. Then I would be writing it down here, and then we would be talking about the meaning of that word, right? It's these things they work together. They are complementary, right? Phonemic awareness and phonics, they go hand in hand.
And there is a question about the scope and sequence. I know personally, I recommend doing it based on the decodable books that you are using. So it all depends what you have access to. I don't think there's you have to start with these letters. I think it's based on the resources that you have. Would you agree with that?
The thing is, there's no one universal phonics scope and sequence.
Mm-hmm.
As a letters trainer, letters does have a scope and sequence. Keys to literacy. Why can't I get her name right now? Goodness gracious, I feel terrible. But Keys to Literacy has a wonderful scope and sequence that they offer for free. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes you'll see SATPIN, SATPIN, from Carnine. That's been around for many, many years as those being the first. Jones, thank you so much. And I so apologize to Joan Sedita. It's nerve-wracking being live and on Zoom because she's amazing. But she offers that for free, and it's a wonderful resource. But as Kathryn said, typically, likely, hopefully, in your school district, you have a scope and sequence, and you follow that scope and sequence. So, for example, in foundations, there's a scope and sequence, and then they have like decodable text geodes to match with that. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have a scope and sequence, I would say go check out Joan Sedita's, or if you have decodable text, you would follow that, because what they're doing in decodable text is they're practicing the skills that you've taught them in isolation. Right. So think about the opportunities that kids get for practice in a decodable text, lots and lots and lots of practice in a decodable text. And it makes sense to the kids if you taught them this, that they, then read it in a text that gives them practice, and they love them. I would say sometimes adults love them very much. They don't find them so exciting, although I think they can be pretty good. But kids find them very exciting because they are successful reading them. and they don't have to use any poor reader habits like looking at pictures and guessing from the first letter, because what makes a text decodable is that they have learned the phonics skills, all of the phonics skills that are a part of that book, as well as the high frequency words in it. So no need to guess.
Yeah, well, and I know the SPELD has a great set of books.
Yeah, they do. Mm-hmm.
And that follows the SAT pin, and then they have the letters, the phonics. Sorry, I should have thought of this. I don't know if you guys can see that very well just because of the lighting, but it has the letter and the the high frequency words that are within the book, so that you can help the student beforehand, and then it.
Right. So so we have a nice progression here. Like if we've taught those skills, then we give students reading them in words, phrases, sentences, and then connected text. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Sorry, just a question. Repeating the keys to
literacy. And it's the phonics. If you just Google keys to literacy, phonics, scope and sequence, it'll come up. It's in a blog that Joan did. And again, my apologies to Joan, because she's amazing, that I completely blanked on her name. She's amazing, does great stuff. So, but it's important to follow a scope and sequence. And then of course, one from least complex to most complex. So, okay, what next, Kathryn?
Yes. Well, and we also wanted to talk about because you're using more the counters and for the phonemic awareness and the blending and everything. There was a question about the colors. The colors don't matter. Everybody uses different colors for their like you have the different color magnets. I'm sure you use them in some orders. Some programs do use a green, yellow, red in a certain order.
Yes, some programs use certain chip colors for consonants, some for vowels. Some represent vowel teams, things like that. What they're doing, is they're giving a visual cue, right, to how kids, and then they'll switch out. For example, if this was a vowel chip, and vowels were always red, then we would add the letter. Right now, I did that by writing it down here, but you could swap out too, right? Because some kids can blend and segment phonemes like a word without a visual cue and a tactile cue that they're moving. This is called see it, say it, move it, say it, move it. But some kids need concrete representational supports temporarily, right? Until they can do it all auditorily. And then eventually they don't need anything at all because they've mapped that word. It's a sight word, right? But, phoneme grapheme mapping is the bridge between phonemes and graphemes. It's, I started out by saying sun, and these chips were representing the phonemes, but then we map the graphemes, right? This is called phoneme grapheme mapping. And this is a bridge between phonology and phonics and spelling, right? And so this is, sometimes when I visit classrooms, I'll say, well, do you know what phoneme grapheme mapping is? And oftentimes, folks don't know. So this is a wonderful instructional routines to help kids map these phonemes to graphemes. And there's a great book by Kathryn Grace that is pretty much the standard bearer for phoneme grapheme mapping. So one box, one sound. So for example, if this word was ship, ship, right, would still be, one phoneme here because one box is for each sound. Yeah. So anyways.
Yeah, and the question about being a general education classroom or smaller groups with struggling readers, and it depends on the level that you're teaching at. So activities like these are great for beginning readers, but once a child is already reading, they may find this tedious, and if they have it and they know it, you don't need to continually do it over and over again. We want it so while the kids are learning it, they do it. And once they've got it, that's great. And that's one thing about phonological awareness that we didn't mention earlier, is that it is something that is transferable. So if you speak more than one language and you have phonological awareness in your home language, it's going to transfer to your school language. And that's where some people who talk about bilingual schooling say, well, if there are more supports in one language over the other. So for example, there's been research studies on French immersion students doing phonological awareness training in English to bring it up because there's more ability to do that. And then once they have it in English, they are going to have it in French. So that is an appropriate way of working on the skill, but we're not going to teach them how to read in English and expect it to transfer in French because of the different relationships between.
So it is important as a teacher to know the phonemes and the language.
Mm-hmm.
The child is bilingual or even more than bilingual, but to know those sounds. So for example, in Spanish, we have 5 vowels, and in English, we have 18. And so, and some of the vowel phonemes in Spanish, although they may be the same sound, the grapheme representing them is different. And so it's confusing to students. So it's really important if you're a teacher to know, of course, the phonemes in the English language, but also if you're teaching students who have another language, to know what those phonemes that student may or may not have, right? So you know directly what to teach or help them to map together. So another thing in terms of phonemic awareness, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kathryn.
Oh, I was just going to say, as in, sorry, I'm not a Spanish speaker, but with French and English, the letter E in French represents, or when you say the name E, that represents the letter I in English, right?
Oh,
so that's where confusion comes in.
Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah,
ASHA, the American Speech Hearing Association, which as speech language pathologists are a part of, they have phonemic transfer analysis. They have like these maps that show you, here are the phonemes in this language and so it's very, very helpful if you're teaching bilingual students. The other thing I was going to say, sorry, if you're teaching phonemic awareness, really your best friend is a mirror, right? So, so that
we talk about that, can we just define what phonetics is?
Oh, phonetics is a study of the English language, right? It's the articulatory gestures. What's happening with our mouth, lips, teeth, tongue, and voicing when we're making the speech sounds. So speech sounds are sounds, but they're also articulatory gestures. And by that, I mean, that's kind of a big word, but it means what's going on, what's going on here. Kids feel sounds too. And often in writing and spelling, they will confuse. So I'll bet you that you have seen students spell like ball, maybe sometimes with a p, because p. So make that sound for P. P. Put your voice hand here, right here. P. And now make the sound for B. B. Right? B. So I'm making the same articulatory gestures, same mouth movements. But when I make the sound for P, I don't turn my voice box on, but when I make it my sound for B, I do. And so they're minimal pairs, which means, they're quite close to each other. And so oftentimes kids will make errors. And when you look at their spelling, it's actually not a spelling error. It's a phonological voicing error.
And that's an important thing to discuss when we're talking about our English as additional language learning students, because in their home language or their first languages, they may not have that phoneme.
Yes,
and it may be something that's considered, because there are different sounds that can be considered the same sound in one language, but different sounds in another language, right? Different phoneme.
Yeah, so I would say if you have speech language, you're lucky enough to have speech language pathologists in your school, they should be your best friend because they know a great deal about language and can really help you. I do these open mic nights about once a month. And last month I had 3 Canadian speech language pathologists talk about how they were supporting literacy, and they're amazing. So definitely mirrors in your speech language pathologist.
They also have a mouth puppet that you can use. It manipulates the tongue. So you can actually show, for students who really struggle with the phonological awareness, show them actually how to put their tongue in relation to their lips and their teeth when they're pronouncing the sounds. And this is not something that you're going to need to use a puppet with all your students, but students that struggle with it. And they can be English first language students that have that underlying phonological awareness deficit.
Yeah, it's really important. So definitely a good thing to learn if you haven't had the opportunity to learn yet. And as Kathryn said, there's a lot of resources. Actually, Kathryn, probably what I'll do with you is, if you don't mind to, I will share my Soundwall Wakelet, because it has a lot of videos on it that show how to make the speech sounds. If that's okay, I'll share that with you too, to share with everybody.
What I was thinking of actually as we were speaking, so there is this great download that Dr. Kastner has prepared for us, and there's a link that you can request it. So if you request this, tomorrow I will work on creating a resource that has the various different links, books, papers, and associations that we've been talking about during this conversation, so you can have access for that. I've noticed in the comments that people are asking for this. So we'll take the time to put that out. We can send it in an email so that you can click on the link and not have to look for it.
Yeah, I'll send you the Wakelet too. That actual resource is a small part of a glossary that was written by Hollis Scarborough. So maybe Scarborough's reading rings a bell here. That's Hollis Scarborough and Susan Brady. So it's a really nice, it's actually 38 pages. So you'll get to see a lot of terms. But I think one of the most important things we can do as teachers at the beginning is to have common language. So when I say phonemic awareness and my colleague says phonemic awareness, we all know exactly what we're talking about. Or when I say phonics or phonetics, everyone knows. So it's really helpful to have common language, which is what we were tonight. So, yeah.
All right. So how about we move more into like the vowel valley and the mirrors? And someone was asking about the difference between the Conan boxes and then actually having the letters underneath. And if we just talk about,
yeah, sure. Well, Conan boxes are sound boxes. So yeah, these really are sound boxes. So, or you could call them Conan boxes. They're pretty much synonymous. So
yeah.
So the important thing to know is one box, one sound. So let's say that I was doing sleigh, A, right? Sleigh, like, hopefully we won't be on any sleighs right now because maybe it's getting close to spring, but right, A, right? But this this grapheme EIGH is representing that long A, but it's only one phoneme. So I have, one box for each phoneme sound. So I have 3 phonemes and I have 3 graphemes. My grapheme S is representing S, my grapheme L is representing O, and the grapheme EIGH is representing this A sound. So.
Right. And one way that I like to bring it to the next level, especially when we're looking at the spelling sort of things, is using dot and jot. And that's where if we had sleigh, we draw 3 circles underneath. And okay, so we need to, that's one of the phonemes taken out so they know that it's represented. L-E-I-G-H. And I find this really handy, especially for students that struggle with the encoding side and leave out phonemes when they're printing and spelling, because this means, okay, I need to make sure that there's one dot for every phoneme in the word, or at least one grapheme.
Right. It's especially when we're working when kids have beginning and ending blends, they tend to sometimes, as we get into more complex words, oftentimes, especially we're back to phonology, but think about, am and an. Whenever we get a vowel sound phoneme next to a nasal sound, and nasal sounds are and like am, and they get co-articulated or smushed together. Very the same thing with when we have a R sound before a vowel, like R or I, they get co-articulated. So oftentimes, like for example, you'll see kids when they're beginning to learn to spell and encode, they might say but they drop out the you'll see they'll drop out that nasal sound, and the reason is because it gets kind of smushed together with that vowel and gets dropped out. So that dot and jot is showing them, oh gosh, I need something here to represent that phoneme. It's like a marker, that
Something
parking spot.
Is that NG is one phoneme.
Yes.
It represents
not the back of your throat.
Yeah.
And the further we think about our speech sounds, it goes front of our mouth to the back of our mouth. And so the sounds that are made at the front are easier for kids because they're more readily seen, like a right? But kind of hard to see, right? So they become a little bit more challenging. So
yeah,
there's so much to know.
Yes, there really is. And I can't believe we've already been going for 50 minutes.
I know, my gosh, it's gone really fast. I'm sorry. What else do we want to talk about in a little bit of time we have left? I'm sorry.
We wanted to talk about using the mirror to help kids.
Definitely.
And talk about
okay, so we talked, I have, this would be my sound wall. I wouldn't have a word wall because kids use when they spell, usually that's what they're using a word wall for. Where do kids begin? Do they begin with speech or print when they're spelling? So someone put in the chat, where do they begin when they're spelling or encoding? Speech or print? Let's see what they say. They begin with speech. Thank you, Tiffany. It's nice to see you. I don't get to see you, but nice to have you here. Yes, they begin with speech, right? And so I want a sound wall because if I have a word wall, I only have 26 letters represented. But remember, we said we have 44 phonemes. So this would be my consonant chart. There's my p and my b, right? And my t and my d and my k and my g. But we're talking about vowel valley for a minute here. Okay. So I want you to watch my mouth. Okay, I'm going to make the vowel valley from the left side. So watch. Ready? E, I, ah. Ready? E, I, ah. So what did you notice? Besides, I probably look pretty funny,
right?
Yeah. Yes. So it's called the vowel valley because, of course, we start up here with this tight smiley E, but as I go down the valley, my mouth opens. But watch, o, u. My mouth kind of closes up and rounds, right? Yes, I do have our sound wall I could recommend if it's all right with Kathryn, because normally we don't like to. Is that okay? Honestly, if you're going to, look at sound walls, and I'm sending Kathryn the link to my Wakelet for sound walls as well. Dr. Mary Dahlgren's Tools for Reading is the only place to go. She has an accurate, because there's a lot of sound walls out there that are not accurate. So Tools for Reading with Dr. Mary Dahlgren, but also in the Wakelet that I'm going to share with Dr. Garforth, definitely check out all the resources on there too. So you have some great ways to learn about sound walls. Sound walls right now are hot, hot, hot. Yes, thank you, Debbie Perry. I appreciate you doing that. But see, here's what I want you to really notice though, in terms of how this impacts spelling. So watch my mouth for E and I. E, I, E, I, E, I. All right, now watch my mouth for E, ah, E, ah. So if I was teaching, this is back to scope and sequence and systematic and least complex to most complex. Would I teach E, I or E, ah?
E, because the difference in the position, right? Because the E and the I are so close together.
Right, so that's very confusing. So also too, you can see why kids might make a spelling error when they're writing, the grapheme, for phoneme E and I, because watch, E, I. But if I had a mirror, E, I, I could see now, of course, with COVID, maybe we won't want kids putting their fingers in their mouth, but right, E, I, see, your mouth opens a little bit there. That's the difference between the E and the I. Because what's happening here, this is an expressive language that's also coming out your pen. Right, and so they're connected. So,
definitely.
But if we teach kids, they're like, oh yeah, I know. And I love being in schools where this is being taught. I had one school that I work with where the college mirrors that you have. Sometimes you hang on your door, but they put it horizontally and it was anchored safely, and it was in their writing area, and the sound wall was right there, and you would see kids as they're writing going up.
Yeah.
Okay, now they know what letter to write, because this is connected to that. It's really powerful and makes kids, self-generative, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and even, there's nothing wrong as having, like, if we're talking about kids that really struggle, having an accommodation of having a mirror at their desk. I mean, you can get them at the dollar store for $1.
Yep, and
and it's not
there is a temporary scaffold. It's a temporary scaffold, but a really powerful one. That makes a difference.
Yeah. Now, there was a question about using the boxes versus tapping. And I think that's all of a matter of program, but I personally definitely like having the boxes to begin with, and then you can progress to the tapping, whether it's on the arm or on the fingers.
Yeah.
It just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It is good to have the boxes because it helps the kids know one sound, that this is representing one phoneme, and now I need a grapheme. And sometimes that grapheme is going to be one letter, and sometimes in SLAE it's going to be 4 letters. Now, here's the thing, though. Of course, in my beginning instruction, would I be teaching kids that long A is spelled E-I-G-H? No, I would not. That is further down the phonics scoped sequence, right? So a logical scoped sequence.
By the time you're teaching that, you're probably not using the boxes anymore.
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah. So
because it's not, we don't want kids to do dot and jot and scope or boxes when they're in grade, 3, 4, and 5. It's just when they're beginning, at the very beginning, and they're getting.
Right. They might be using the boxes for multisyllabic words.
Yeah.
If they're, have a really complex, long multisyllabic word, but then each box would have one syllable, and then they would blend it together. So you can transition it too.
Well, and that's where the syllable awareness, while we're not going to be using it right away with our kids in K1, 2, aside from making them aware of it, but as they go into those bigger words and, the more complex words with the morphology involved, I mean, I break words down into syllables still.
Right. You could even do it
in spelling it.
Kindergarten. I taught kindergarten many years. So it could be cats, and that S is a representation of a morpheme, meaning more than one. So we have 2 morphemes, but 4 phonemes. So you can start that in kindergarten. But of course, phonics instruction doesn't end in the lower grades. We do those advanced word study with morphology and etymology. We don't want to stop, because the words get more complex.
That's the important thing. That is another thing that we should mention as better, right? Because a lot of teacher education programs focus, K1, 2, maybe. That's when you're teaching reading, but then after that's done, you don't need to focus it on anymore. And that's a huge disservice to our students, especially when we get to those more complex words that have the morphemes. And a lot of our academic language, I can't remember the quote or the actual number, but I think Marcia Henry says something about 80 or 90% of academic words can be traced to Latin or Greek.
Yeah, if you're really into that, Unlocking Literacy from Marcia Henry is the book to read. Do you mind if I just show them the resources real quick because I know?
No, not at all. Yes, let's do that. And I'm just I did put the link for you to click on to enter your email if you're wanting. So right away you will get this download with the glossary. Tomorrow you will get the links of the conversation. Dr. Kastner and I are going to stay on for a little bit after this, just so we can make sure we have all the resources there so that we can send that to you tomorrow. So you will be getting 2 emails, one today, one tomorrow, just to get you this stuff, because I know it's important, and especially giving you access to it in the future. Now, you were going to share with us a quick outline of what a phonics lesson might look like.
Yep, just a couple quick things, because I know we're getting close here, and I know your time is valuable. One thing, and actually I'll share 2 of these. Tiffany probably knows, I think, because I noticed your name, Tiffany. I have been curating resources. Had been doing that on Padlet and just moved them recently to Wakelets, but basically it's just a way for me to curate information and resources to share with you. So this one is all about phonemic awareness, and it's very important, of course, to get to the phoneme level ASAP, that individual phoneme level. And this is the glossary. This is the whole thing. I just did a few of those wonderful PH words there, but there are many, many resources here. You see the amazing Margie Gillis and that one and only Dr. Louisa Moats. Lots of knowledge building here. And then resources for you too. Okay, so that you'll have that. tons and tons there. But since we talked a tiny bit about sound walls, I will share my sound wall Wakelet with Kathryn too, to share with you. The other resource you may be aware of, but just in case you're not, is there is a free phonics scope and sequence with all the lessons done. Work smarter, not harder, right? And it's called the West Virginia Phonics. And, it starts from least complex to most complex. So I'll just show you very, very quickly here. You see a nice scope and sequence here, right? For a nice phonological or phonics lesson plan that begins with a warm-up and phonological awareness, letter sounds, blending routines, word work, dictation. Oh, that dictation is spelling. And then this text application for the skill that's been taught. And then you have a whole week of lessons. And then you have these short decodable texts for kids to get repeated practice. And of course, it gets more challenging, right? This is just the very beginning skills, the CBCs, but all completely free. And then letters, language essentials for teachers and reading spelling. I just want to show you quickly their phonics lesson plan. So you'll see, so when we're teaching a phonics lesson, it should look like this, right? Of course, we state the goal and the purpose of the lesson. There's a practice of phonological awareness, that warm up. We review previously what we've learned. We introduce a new concept directly and explicitly, provide guided practice and extended practice. There's that dictation. We should always be encoding and spelling what we're reading, mapping it to meaning, right? Just like sun, or if the word pitch has many multiple meanings, they can pitch something, or they can have sap that's pitch. And then we would read a text, a decodable text, right? That aligned with all the skill. So, we have a complete lesson for students. And then we were going to try to talk about phonics intervention, but we didn't have time. So I was going to share with you just this resource from 95% group, which of course,
we can put that in.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. So gosh, that hour went really, really fast. It did. And I want to thank you, Kathryn, for being here, and also for all of you. I mean, you obviously worked all day long. I'm sure your teachers, and here you are still at May, continue your learning. So it was an honor to spend an hour with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you for doing this. I mean, as educators, whether we're a classroom teacher, a resource teacher, someone supporting students outside of school, we're signing up for lifelong learning, right? Because we're constantly getting changes and better understanding, especially with all the research out there. And we will make sure that we get this to you. It's great resource, and it's going to give you the things that you can say, okay, you know what, I have half an hour. I want to go into this a little bit deeper.
Yeah.